In 2005, my youngest sister Lori was diagnosed with a very rare form of terminal cancer. When asked where it came from or where it started, the doctor said that most likely it had laid dormant in her body for many years until the day that it burst wide open. And when it burst open, it spread very fast, eventually causing her death months later. What I want to talk to you about today is something very similar to this cancer because it can lay dormant in our bodies, but left unattended, it will burst open. It will burst open. And when it bursts, it will take over every area of our lives, including the people in our own lives, and not in a good way. The Bible calls it a root of bitterness, a root of bitterness. The writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 12:13, "Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." In Hebrew culture, any poisonous plant was called bitter. So we can be assured that bitterness is like poison invading one's body and then spilling out and poisoning others. Let's look at where bitterness comes from, how it looks, how it's manifested, and how to yank it out. Make sure to stay engaged with me today, as this message might be for you or for someone that you know. The root of bitterness comes from unresolved hurt, pain, or a terrible circumstance in our life. And it can be directed at people, it can be directed at a situation, or even at God. And by unresolved, I mean that we haven't learned to forgive what has happened to us, or we simply haven't walked away from it, letting it go. You may be familiar with the 12-step program of AA. There are 12 steps to sobriety, but the very first step is that you have to recognize that you have a problem or you'll never seek help. Well, the same goes for bitterness. If we want to be free of it, we simply have to recognize that it's there. Naomi in the Old Testament is a perfect example of this. Within a 10-year span, she had lost everything. She had lost her homeland, her husband, and her 2 sons. She eventually returned back to her home, which was Bethlehem, with her foreign daughter-in-law, Ruth. And when she got back, she told the folks there to call her Mara, which means bitter, because she said that God had made her life very bitter. She said that when she left full, but she was returning empty. It seems that she blamed God for her unfortunate circumstances and even possibly her husband for her difficulties. But she also recognized it. Which is the first step to yanking that root of bitterness out. You may be wondering how you can recognize a root of bitterness. Well, here's one way. So when a name is brought up or a not so good circumstance or memory comes to your mind, how do you respond to it? Do you feel animosity or anger or unhealthy thoughts, or do you simply erupt? Does something just spur you to just spew nasty things or spew things like just negativity? Because I've seen this happen so many times. And if this is the way that you react in a certain situation, then you might possibly have a root of bitterness growing inside of you. And so it's always good to do a self-evaluation, because we do not want a root of bitterness. So the question becomes, why not? Why do we not want a root of bitterness in our lives? What harm will it do? Well, Jeremiah the prophet in his book of Lamentations gives us word pictures of what this root will do in our lives. Throughout chapter 3, he describes it this way: dark, afflicted, anguish, distress, chains, a crooked road, helpless, devastation, sorrow, no peace, no joy, awful. These things are a terrible way to live, don't you agree? But we must not miss verse 4 of Lamentations 3 that says, "He has made my skin and flesh grow old." I believe it's saying that a bitter root allowed to grow causes us to age on the inside and the outside. Basically, it makes us age and grow old faster. But we mustn't forget that a bitter root will cause us to act in our flesh rather than walk by the Spirit of God. It surely gives Satan a foothold, a strong foothold into our lives. And many people in our lives will be affected by our bad behavior. It causes division in families, relationships, churches, and communities. I can truly say that I don't know anyone who wants to live like this. A bitter root is so poisonous that it will kill everything in its pathway. It will kill marriages, relationships, unity, our vision, our passion, and it will squash truth. And once truth is squashed, we will be more susceptible to following a deceiving spirit. But here's the thing. We can't do anything about what's happened to us, right? But we can do something about this root of bitterness taking up residence in our hearts. And Jeremiah shows us 2 specific ways that we can yank that root of bitterness out. First, we must speak it out loud in the presence of the Lord. Jeremiah did that in Lamentations 3 when he wrote all those things down. I picture him just saying all of those things out loud as he came into the presence of the Lord. Recently, I had a very terrible week. And I say terrible, I mean it was terrible. It seemed like one thing after another just kept crashing down upon me. And I found myself succumbing to Satan's attacks. I had become unglued, unhinged. I was snapping at people. Everything was difficult, and I allowed it to affect me. I gave in to my flesh. But then I realized what I must do. I must take every negative word, every angry thought, and every upset feeling and lay them on the altar. I pictured coming into the presence of the Lord, but as I got closer, I saw an altar. I noticed that I had to lay those things if I wanted joy and peace to return. So I spoke it and laid it. I spoke it and I laid it. And then I rested in the presence of the Lord. And it didn't take long for me to feel back to myself or to come back to my senses and to enjoy myself again. And then I could see all the good things around me that I couldn't see that week. Second, we need to spend time every day poring over God's character and attributes. And I capitalized every day because that's important. After listing all those terrible things going on in his heart, Jeremiah said this in Lamentations 3:22-23. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. It seems that every morning he would enter God's presence and center his thoughts on all that God is and all that he's promised. And I want to tell you one thing. This alone will lift a spirit so fast. Now let me say this. Go easy on yourself. Don't live under a huge weight of guilt because you've messed up. Remember, even the strongest believers struggle with their flesh. Paul tells us about his struggle in Romans 7:19 when he said, I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. Bitterness is like having terminal cancer. It spreads like wildfire unattended. But you can get rid of it. You can get rid of it. It's a root. And is it worth the effort? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's just yank out that root of bitterness.